Welcome back to the new Yachtsman channel. Today I've got a guest, John Farrell. John's got a lot of experience in the Far East and other parts of the world in yachting. And I thought we'd just chat with him today and maybe get a little insight as to what that part of the world is like for a new yachtsman. John, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Thanks, Bill, for inviting me along. I've been looking forward to this for a few weeks. So I've spent the last 10, 15 years almost now in the Far East, in Thailand, Malaysia, and probably the last frontier for yachting is Myanmar, Burma. Not the place to go at the moment. Give it a year or two and it'll settle down. I spent probably almost 15 years doing the milk run, San Remo, Saint Tropez, the Mediterranean, Caribbean, that sort of thing. And I moved down to Phuket in Thailand to actually do the shoreside support. So we used to work with the yachts, super yachts coming in there. Um, yeah, so that's where I've sailed.
So, what do you think the primary difference is with Asian yachting versus the US and Europe? Is it really just lack of infrastructure is the first thing that hits you?
In Myanmar, there is no infrastructure. Absolutely none. I spent 10 years there, and I was blessed. I was there during their period of democracy. They haven't had democracy there since the war, literally late mid 60s, and recently it's gone back that way. So it's a third world country. There is no infrastructure there. However, the beauty of it is that Phuket is one of the best set up, if not the best set up, location for super yachts, and it's an overnight trip, 8, 10 hours from Phuket to the entrance into Myanmar. Because it's so simple getting into, because it's so basic in Myanmar, it's quite simple getting in. We flew one of the boats we had down there, had a helicopter. To fly it off the aft deck in Thailand, we had to produce almost a manual, videos, what it was going to do, and they couldn't get their head around it. So the helipad moves. I mean, yeah, it's on a boat. It's going to move. Yes. Myanmar, they're like, okay, well, don't fly over the land and sign this piece of paper, basically, just one document. So, yeah, no infrastructure, but ease of going in. But the beauty of Myanmar and Thailand and Phuket, very much the same. Myanmar more so than compared to the Caribbean or the Mediterranean. There is no other boats. You're unlikely to see another boat. Um, in Myanmar, we're deep sea fishing. It's as remote and almost as good. I spent a month in Papua New Guinea and the Solomon Islands, which is as untouched. But the Solomon Islands, Papua New Guinea is just there's no there's very limited population, so they haven't made a mess of the marine environment as much as the Caribbean or Europe. So actually diving in Myanmar is phenomenal. Papua New Guinea is I would rate that as the best in the world. Palau, Papua New Guinea. Um, some of the diving I did in Mexico was pretty incredible. But the underwater life is phenomenal. The support, as I said, isn't there. Phuket, you can pretty much get anything done for a super yacht. We have there's two major marinas down there that will take anything up to about 80 meters. Uh, and we had boats. We had a 55 meter, and then she was there for 6 months, and they pretty much did a not quite an out of the water refit, but everything but that. And for anything serious like that, Singapore's only a couple of days away. So um, the infrastructure is in Thailand, is in Southeast Asia. It's just a little bit more spread out. But I think the beauty of Asia is that the boat can go down there, the owner can fly in, get on the boat, and they're out for a couple of weeks, and they don't probably won't see anybody else except the crew. It's it is an incredible place to live. And having been around yachting, super yachting since the late 80s, and yachting itself, I grew up in New Zealand, um, and I could sail before I could walk. So I think, yeah, Southeast Asia's right up there.
If you're there on your own yacht, maybe with a light crew, what do you think about security? Do you think it's safe for say an 80-foot boat with a crew of two to transverse those waters right now?
I was actually I was employed to go into Myanmar to take a 70-foot sailboat in to train locals to work on super yachts. Um, and I was really lucky with that company. They supported me through there, and I now have one guy who works on a 80-meter sailboat. I think he's in the Med at the moment. I'm not quite sure where they are. And I have another guy that's in Spain. So I took those guys through training like that, and most of my training obviously was on the boat, in the water, in the islands around Myanmar. Yangon itself is the main city, 9 million people. I feel safer. I mean, I don't like sending my wife out by herself at night, but I would send her if she had to. She could go out in Yangon. I wouldn't feel as safe in London or New York or Miami. Yangon, no problem. It's really seriously safe. The only questionable area is Singapore, the Malacca Straits around Indonesia, and that sort of goes for any boat. But usually there are one or two pirates there. They're more after commodities like oil or small cargo ships. As far as safety goes, there's no problems there taking any size of boat. I think what you're saying there about distances, the transports ship. What is it? YST or something? The cargo ship that takes yachts around the world. That actually stops in Phuket. So anything from about 50 feet to about 100 feet, I think they will actually transport down there for you.
Dockwise. Are you talking about the
Dockwise,
Dockwise
yeah,
ship?
sorry.
Yeah,
Dockwise,
yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, no,
Um,
that's a great option, new Yachtsman. If you haven't heard of it, look up the Dockwise yacht transport. Crossing ocean sounds all great, but after 4 or 5 days staring out the window, you'll start to wonder whether putting your yacht on a ship is a better idea.
it takes a
Um,
bit of a dedicated owner to do those long passages. I was on one boat with Italians, and they used to like doing the passages, which is hard on the crew. Um, Usually, the boats that I took from the Med across to the Caribbean, we'd get there, set the boat up, and then the owners would fly in. They'd have their time there. We'd sit there in the Caribbean. The boat would move somewhere else, and they'd go back to work, or they'd go back home for a few weeks, and then they'd fly back in, and the boat would move, and they'd fly into our destinations. And I think that's pretty much. I think the thing with Southeast Asia, if you're American based or European based, that's a long trip, even by private jet. So it's not the sort of thing you're going to do more than twice a season. Um, and you're saying there about the trips, the voyages once the boat's there. Phuket to Phuket to Myanmar is overnight. It's 8 hours, and it's 10,000 square miles, 800 islands. Some of them are bigger than Singapore. These are not small little islands. They're huge islands, but they're all within sight of one another, each other. So you're never gonna do overnight long passages. You possibly would if you were in New Zealand. There's longer trips that you would do in New Zealand from Auckland, where the boats are based, to the Bay of Islands. The Barrier Reef in Australia, you get a little bit longer trips. Um, Singapore's a little bit harder because once you're out of the Marina 21 in Singapore, you're in the Gulf.
what does it look like over there? Is everything over there kind of in the target window, or what
It's
is?
pretty much like the Caribbean. You have your the monsoon period where you've got the rains, the hurricanes will come through. You'll hear they'll hit the Philippines, and the Philippine gets hit on a regular basis. The archipelago itself, the Mergui archipelago in Myanmar, probably gets hit by one every 3 to 4 years, fairly similar to the Caribbean.
Gotcha. And then if you're south of there, you're okay. They all track
Yeah,
north.
once you're down in Singapore, you're close to the equator. You can drop from Singapore, Indonesia. I did a trip just before COVID. I did a trip from Indonesia to Brisbane in Queensland in Australia, and that was right in the edge. So that was November. That was right in the edge of the hurricane season. And those hurricanes will drop down to Brisbane. In that central belt, south of Singapore, Indonesia, you're pretty safe, but it does get quite hot, steamy, 100% humidity. It's uncomfortable in the dry season.
What about cost wise? Are things generally similarly priced as everywhere else in the world, or are you paying a huge markup for imported goods?
That depends where you are. You can pay some. I paid some terrible prices in Turkey. It really depends what you're talking about. If you're looking at imported marine equipment, you're going to pay for it, but then you'll pay for it in Australia, Singapore. Local commodities, vegetables, alcohol. Surprisingly, because I've been there for 10 years, I come back here. I never really appreciated the tax that Western governments put on a bottle of beer or a bottle of gin. It's horrendous. Um, Coming out of Phuket, I had one boat. I had a group of Russians on the boat, and they left Phuket. It's only overnight. They left Phuket, and I got a phone call from the captain in the morning, and he said, "Look, we're a couple of miles inside Myanmar. We need you to send some more champagne because they've found out that champagne and fresh pineapples off the tree, go really well together." They'd gone through a crate of champagne and overnight. It was a big boat. There was a lot of guests on it. Sorry. So as far as getting those sort of things at that level, Cristal, at that level of quality, it's not a problem in Phuket. Phuket is a tourist-based island, landside. The yachting's fully supported. You can get the best food, the best wine that you want at a pretty reasonable price. I'd easily compare it to France, and it's because of the taxation, I think. So the taxation, the transportation costs balance each other out. And then, of course, in the tropics, you can get some quite different meals. I had another boat, Italian owner, Italian captain, Italian crew, and I had a fantastic Thai chef. And she went on the boat and she showed them how to make Thai curry. They'd never had anything like it before. They couldn't get enough of it. I got her to make the curry sauce and vacuum pack it into bags and freeze it so they could go away with several kilos of this curry sauce. So the quality of the food, it's different, but you can, if you want to explore, the quality of the raw materials is fantastic because it's fresh.
And you'd say that fishing and diving is the best you've ever seen in that part of the world?
It's some of the best. I remember off Panama, just we had the boat at a 45-meter in one of the bays, and the owner was on the support boat, trawling and just picking up dolphin fish, picking up swordfish at that level. But that was in Panama. We could do the same thing in Myanmar. Myanmar is not being overfished like a lot of the rest of Asia. The other side, China through the Philippines, is sort of being really fished out by the Chinese. Papua New Guinea's sort of heading that way. Palau is really hard on their marine life, or they're really protective of it. So they don't allow fishing. You pay a premium to dive there, but it is phenomenal. It's 60-foot visibility. It's some of the best visibility I've seen. Myanmar, the same. It hasn't been the fishing hasn't been stripped out of it by the Chinese trawlers. They just get these big trawlers and they just slowly get closer and closer to the land. So a lot of the Indian Ocean has been fished out. Even Kerala in India is a phenomenal place. But the trouble with India is it's sort of incredible bays. But once you're outside the bay, you're in the middle of the ocean. So India's more of a passing through point for yachts that do the trip down through Suez. They'll usually bounce across to the Maldives and then across to Phuket in Thailand. But yeah, the fishing and the diving is phenomenal. It's really good, really great.
So if a new yachtsman maybe shipped their yacht in there, maybe what do you think? 2 or 3 months to see the area adequately as a owner operator cruiser? And what would that look like? What's the kind of triangle you would advise them to stay in, geography wise?
It was always a bit frustrating in Myanmar because there was no facilities there. The boats used to come down, the charter yachts used to go to Phuket and they would charter out of there. Every single charter I did, and the boats that we were working with, they probably were doing 30 to 40 a season. Every single one was leaving Phuket to spend 2 or 3 weeks in Myanmar. But once you've seen one long sandy white beach to the next sandy white beach to the next sandy white beach, it's sort of, it sort of becomes a bit same. A lot of owners want the sort of the balance. So what we would normally do is they'd join the boat, they'd spend a couple of days in Phuket because Phuket has a bit of a reputation as a holiday destination, just for the nightlife, for the really high quality restaurants, and then spend a week and a half in the islands, and then come back to Myanmar for a few days. So there was not last season just gone in Myanmar, but there was hundreds of charters into Myanmar every season. And most of it was because there was nothing else there. It was just fishing, beaches. As I said, some of the islands are bigger than Singapore. You've got rivers that you can traverse up. You've got huge flocks of birds that you just don't get anywhere else in the world, because they've been untouched by mass urbanization or villages or anything like that. Once you go south, Phuket's an island. There's a few islands around there. Phi Phi is quite popular, but there's sort of a little bit more backpacker type destinations. So the diving is quite good, but for a super yacht, you don't really want to go. It's just a bit much. But if you've got a big yacht that you base down there for a season to charter, it's a fantastic destination. There's not that many boats that would be down there in a season, probably 20 to 30, and I'm talking the 50 meter plus market here. And a lot of boats, most of the boats actually would use it as a sort of, is their round the world trip, or they go through, they spend a season in Phuket. They might spend a season in Indonesia. Indonesia's a little bit harder. It doesn't quite have the same facilities. The diving's incredible again, and you can get well away from civilization. And then across into the Barrier Reef in Queensland, and then on to New Zealand. So most boats would do that sort of trip. They'd usually, a lot of them will dock express down to Phuket, and then they'll go under their own steam through the islands, through Queensland down to New Zealand. They'll dock express back up from New Zealand up to Panama, or up to the west coast. So it's sort of and that would be usually a sort of a 2 to 3 year thing. No, but boats don't tend to go down there for a season and then back to Europe, or they're there for a season back to the States.
Yeah, they're going around the world, or they're on a larger journey. Gotcha.
I think they're on that round the world journey, and it takes a special crew, a special captain to do that. And I was really lucky. The Italian boat I was on, she was on a second circumnavigation, and the owners loved the boat, so they spent more time on the boat than they did off the boat. She was 55 meters, and the cabins were tiny. And the owner was like, "Well, if you're on my boat, and we're enjoying what we're seeing in the environment, you're not sitting in your cabin." So that was his theory, and it worked really well for him. They probably spent 6-7 months of the year on the boat, quite a long time. They didn't do so many of the passages with us. They would just come in for the destinations. And that captain had been with them for a while, and I think there's lots of captains that are on that sort of thing. So it's a different type of captain. Yeah.
What about I guess one of the things I would struggle with trying to plan this myself is the local politics. The national news of all of us Westerners really doesn't cover these smaller countries very well. How do you find out what's going on locally? Because I find if I just try to get on the local websites and things, that very often it's not even in English, or it's poorly translated. I really don't have a clue what's going on. I'd be nervous to just show up with my yacht.
You definitely in Asia need an agent. It's and I was a captain for quite a few years, and I tended not to, an agent. That's what the owner's paying me for. But there are certain places that you need an agent. I didn't have one going through Panama, no problem. But that area of the world, the Mediterranean, the Americas, are more set up for tourists coming in by sea. Southeast Asia is not quite as well set up. And an agent, a good agent, and there's lots of agents out there, a good agent will follow you up with the captain. when I was a captain in chartering, I was always following up with the principal charter guest. So I was always giving them feedback, what was going to happen on their charter 2 months ahead. So where we were going, what they were likely to see, just to sort of get them a bit excited about what was happening. But that was me. But I've done lots of traveling around the world, so I can drop into Palau or I can drop into Costa Rica, and I'm up and running. But that's
So what am I searching for when I'm looking for this agent? What's it called if I'm just sitting at home in the US and I want an agent to go to that part of the world? What am I looking for?
that's a good question actually, because obviously the answer is Google yacht agency, and in Phuket you'll get 5 or 6 of them.
Okay.
So the first thing I would do, and of course they're not all created equal. The first thing I do is I say, so what's your background in yachting? What experience have you had on yachts as an agent? Because really, as an agent, you can set up, if you've got a mobile phone and a laptop and a landline, get a phone connection, you're away. But really understanding what yachts want. I went into Costa Rica, and I'd arranged with the agent to fuel up, and we were going from Panama to Acapulco, so it was a whistle stop. And I explained when I was going to be there, what time I was going to be there, and I followed up 3 or 4 times. No problem. So we pulled in, and there's a container ship sitting there. Oh, you can't do it today. You can do it next week. And no, this is not how yachting works. So that's the sort of agent you don't want to get a hold of.
Gotcha.
So that's the first thing. There's lots of yacht agents out there, and there's half a dozen in Phuket, but they really need to understand that yachting is, I mean, if you're a captain, you know that you start jumping and you ask, is this high enough? You've got to be ahead of the game, and then the agents have to be ahead of the game as well. There's lots of demands. These owners, they pay a lot of money, they expect, and quite rightly so. And you as the captain end up with a huge amount of stress if you get somewhere and the agent isn't doing it all right, isn't on top of it, and isn't telling you ahead what's going on. So as a yacht agent, I would say don't go to Myanmar this season. Keep in contact with a very good agent down there to see when it starts to open up again.
Very good.
And on these trips, when you're going in those sort of distances as well, as an owner, I think there has to be a bit of flexibility, because you're going into quite different cultures. And Asia, New Zealand, Australia are pretty switched on, but it's a different culture to Europe, the English or America. So they have different ways of doing things. So it might always work the same way. I was in New Zealand for the America's Cup, and it was so we used to fly the celebrities from the airport private to the boat, and then they would go ashore at night. So they were in New Zealand for the Cup, and nobody ever knew. But it was only because I had the contacts to the Air Force helicopter division that I could arrange to pick these guys up, fly across the city in a private helicopter, which they don't do very much in Auckland, in New Zealand. So local things can happen down there. And sometimes it's actually easier, as I said, with the boat that we had with the helicopter. It was a nightmare trying to fly it in Thailand. In Myanmar, they just wanted a piece of paper sign. What's the radio sign? Yeah, okay, don't fly over land. But we won't check you. So again, as I said before, the captain needs to be a bit more switched on for travel in different cultures as well. They've got to be really flexible, really have done some traveling in themselves. I'm from New Zealand, so I think I was lucky in the fact that I'd done a lot of traveling to different places before I sat myself in the Mediterranean, and I was there for 10 years or so in the more than 10 years in the Mediterranean. But I had the experience outside, and if you just have a captain that sits in the Mediterranean, it's going to be harder for them to go to Southeast Asia, because it's all going to be new, and they're going to have to rely so much more on their agent.
John, one other thing, I know you've got a lot of super yacht experience. How about some advice for the kind of 50 to 80 foot yacht owner that's kind of doing it themselves? Maybe they've got a limited crew, or maybe they're on their own.
It's I was in Phuket, and we actually had a couple of the World Sailing rallies come through, And I think I probably haven't, they're probably not running at the moment because of COVID, but they do have those rallies that come through where if you've got a 40, 50, 60-foot yacht, you're a couple, maybe one crew, you can actually jump onto those rallies. There's one out of Australia that comes up through Indonesia, Singapore, Malaysia, goes up to Phuket and then carries on to the Maldives. So there's a couple of those, at least one a year. Sometimes there's two a year as they travel around the world. And I think it's a great way to travel, the support you'll get from the other boats, great relationships. I think the last one we did in Phuket, I think it was 25 boats. I mean, they're quite big rallies. So there's a lot of this sort of support there. If you can't get things fixed or you're in the middle of nowhere, then there'll be a boat around that you can support you. And then those rallies will actually say, right, we're going to be in Phuket in this period, and then you can have things sent ahead like mail and contacts, or you can change crew, that sort of thing. So I think the rallies can also give you some of the background that a super yacht agent would struggle to do. Again, a super yacht agent knows how to look after the big boats, fly the aircraft in, if the owner's coming in private jets, getting the best food, that sort of thing. A 40, 50-foot yacht that's a bit more self-contained, they probably need an agent. Now, agents cost money. They probably need an agent to just check on the paperwork, direct them, where the local supermarkets are, where the local markets are, what to do, what not to do. So there are agents that can work with you permanently, or in a smaller boat can just sort of do a couple of days. So the rallies are the best way to go. But a lot of the yacht clubs, I know the yacht clubs, the marinas in Singapore are quite well set up for that now, with the smaller boats coming through.
Well, that's great, John. I really appreciate your background in this part of the world, and I think there's a lot of new yachtsmen out there that'll benefit from it. And you guys, if you're planning on traveling around the world, this sounds like a very natural stop for you. Please like and subscribe. Thank you very much.